Chapter 4 Falling. I had a date last night, I said, casting my line into the water. Wait a minute, Kate said. You went on a date? She pressed her hand to my forehead, and I snorted. You don't have a fever? We're talking a date? Like with a woman and everything? Lee said. Okay, you guys, I am not sick, and yes, I went on a real date. And we're going out again tonight. With the same girl? Kate squealed. Yes, with the same girl, and calm down. You're going to scare the fish. Who cares? This is awesome. Lee grinned. I knew you had it in you, bro. She must be something. She is pretty amazing. Kate pulled her chair closer. Tell us all about her and your date and leave nothing out. Good grief. Can a guy keep some things to himself? No, Lee and Kate said together, and I laughed. Her name is Suzanne, and you will love her. I told them how we met and shared what I had learned about her. Kate heaved a girlish sigh when I told them about our date. Lee said I had forever ruined things for him because now he would have to start romancing his wife again. She said it was about time they did something more than pizza and bowling. I laughed as they went back and forth for a minute before kissing and making up. They were a good-looking couple, Lee with his wheat blonde hair and hazel eyes, and Kate with her dark brown locks and chocolate eyes. Other than my parents, I had never seen two people more in love. So, when do we get to meet her? Kate asked. Well, that depends on how tonight's date goes. Lee handed me some lemonade, clicking his cup against mine. We'll keep our fingers crossed for you. The rest of the summer flew by in a whirlwind of fun and romance. Suzanne and I saw each other almost every other day, and my feelings for her quickly grew. Many of our dates were spent at my home, cooking dinner together, going for a swim, or watching movies. Sometimes we would sit out by the lake and talk. Suzanne always insisted that we take a blanket, on which we would lay and kiss, though I always had to call forth a great deal of willpower to keep things from going further. I tried to limit our time by the lake. A few times we even invited her roommate Lila and her little girl to spend time with us at my place, or I went to theirs. Lila was very nice and looked exactly like her photo, and she was indeed too thin. Katya was absolutely beautiful, and I completely adored her. She had just turned 4, and when she looked at me with those big gray eyes, she could get me to do anything. I even babysat her a few times to give Lila and Suzanne some time out together. Each time I did, I could not resist taking her shopping, and I usually brought her home with a few new outfits and toys. Suzanne and Lila were always giddy when we arrived, a sign that they had really enjoyed their time. I fell in love with Suzanne that summer, and I wanted to be with her always. One night in late August, we ordered dinner in at my place. It had been a week of pondering for me, and I'd finally come to a decision. I quickly set the wheels in motion, preparing for this night. Over dinner, I told Suzanne I loved her. She said she loved me too. Placing a ring box in front of her, I asked her to marry me, and she gave me an ecstatic yes. She quickly moved from her chair to my lap and kissed me hungrily, and my response was equal to the passion she exuded. I had grown used to the slightly sweet taste of wine on her lips. The flavor was a part of her, and because she always limited herself to just 2 glasses, I was okay with that. The following day, I told my friends the news. Kate was slightly subdued, but she and Lee congratulated me and said they were happy for us. Kate said we would have beautiful babies, and I agreed. I couldn't wait to start a family. I received congratulations from Sylvia as well. So this is it, I guess, she said. You guess? I laughed. Yes, this is it. I have met the woman I want to spend my life with, and I have you to thank for it. All I did was step in the elevator with you two. It's all about timing. Well, time was definitely on my side that day. I am happy for you, Angelo. I hope that you will be happy. There was a tone of graveness in her voice. I always called it her mothering tone. Be happy, Angelo. I will be. I squeezed her hand. You will be there, right? For the wedding, I mean. She smiled. I wouldn't miss it. We were married during the week of Christmas. Suzanne said she had always dreamed of having a Christmas wedding. The ceremony was held in the church she'd attended growing up. Lance and Teresa Haynes, though not well off, spared no expense, wanting to give their daughter the perfect wedding. They were two of the kindest people I had ever met, and we got along great. It had been a pleasure getting to know them over the months, and it was easy to see how much they loved Suzanne. Lila was Suzanne's maid of honor, and Katya was the cutest flower girl anyone had ever seen. Suzanne's dress was sleek silk and lace that hugged her curves. The train was long, as was the veil. She looked wonderful. I wore a classic black tux. We exchanged vows and rings and were pronounced husband and wife. The kiss we shared was tender, and I marveled that we were really married. I was a lucky man. During the reception, we mingled a bit, deciding to forego a receiving line. There were endless congratulations and well wishes. We ate, danced, and reveled in our happiness. Suzanne had 3 glasses of wine. Afterward, we flew down to Key West for our honeymoon. It was a wonderful beginning to the rest of our lives. Chapter 5. Waking to Reality. 6 years later. Hearing the front door open and close, I turned over in the darkness and squinted at the clock. It was 2 in the morning. At least she'd made it home. Some nights she didn't. I was used to it now. Turning onto my back, I raked a hand back through my hair, listening for her distant footsteps on the tile hallway floor. She would tell me I needed a haircut again. She said the same thing each time she came in late, letting her hands roam in a clumsy attempt to initiate intimacy after being out all night with friends. My hair brushed my collar now, the black waves permanently tousled. I liked my hair this way and had no desire to change it. As long as I looked groomed, I was fine with it. I did still have control over some things. I continued to listen for her. Her progress was slow, as always. While I waited, I again let my mind drift back over the years of our marriage. The changes had been slow, but each one served to further widen a small tear in my heart that had begun on our wedding day with that 3rd glass of wine. For the first 6 months, things were wonderful between us. Not perfect, but I was happy starting a new life with the woman I loved. We had agreed before our marriage that Suzanne would quit her job and focus on her studies to finish her degree. She had been excited about being a homemaker and had spent her dreams of how we would spend our time together. However, whenever I brought up the subject of children, she would change it. Over time, her dreams changed and her ambitions lowered as the glasses of wine increased. She and Lila started spending more evenings out. I babysat, of course, which was the only part I didn't mind. Then Lila began to have increased emotional issues, and Suzanne was away even more. She said she needed to be there for Lila, and I should understand. I wasn't happy about spending so much time apart, but I did try to be understanding and sympathetic. Lila had been through a lot, and it was only natural that she would lean on my wife. The two had known each other for years, and there was a lot of history between them. 2 years later, Lila's drinking and subsequent drug use were the cause of her losing her job, so Suzanne started lending her money for rent and groceries. It became a habit, and I told Suzanne that though I cared for Lila, I would not continue to fuel her addiction. She accused me of being too harsh. I also told Suzanne the best way she could help Lila was by example, hoping that she would eventually stop drinking too. Sadly, Suzanne still did not realize that she had a problem. I finally sat down with Lila one day and encouraged her to enroll in a substance abuse program. She was wasting away before my eyes, and I worried about her one day going too far. After weeks of begging her to get help for Katya's sake, she said she would, but only if Suzanne and I agreed to be Katya's legal guardians. She didn't want to worry about her being taken care of while she was away. We agreed. I had my attorney draw up the paperwork, and everything was signed, filed, and approved. We were now the guardians of a 6-year-old. The day we went to pick up Katya and take Lila to the treatment center, we walked into the apartment to find Katya's arm badly burned from trying to boil water to cook some noodles for lunch. The crying little girl was sitting by her mother, who was lying on the floor, unconscious, a puddle of vomit pulled around her head. Lila had overdosed. We called the paramedics, but nothing could be done. She was already dead. Because Suzanne was a wreck and inconsolable, I called her parents. They came to take her home with them. I rode in the ambulance with Katya and held her in the emergency room while the doctor treated her burn. I could feel the shuddering whimpers roll through her little body as she burrowed against my chest, and it brought tears to my own eyes. Both our worlds were turned upside down. She'd just lost her mother to a horrible death. I had lost a dear friend, and I felt like I was losing my wife, too. At that moment, I didn't know what to do or what to think. Suzanne's father had kindly followed the ambulance in my car before he and his wife took Suzanne to their place. When Katya's arm had been treated, I drove back to what was once her home to get some of her things. I did not want to take Katya inside, so I had her wait in the car. She was already traumatized enough, and I didn't want to make it worse. Running inside, I quickly gathered what I could and put it all in a garbage sack, since that was the only thing I could find that would fit everything. I had no desire to search Lila's room for anything more sufficient, wanting to avoid seeing the spot where her body had lain. When we reached home, I grabbed the sack and carried Katya inside, moved to tears again as her little arms clung to my neck. I ended up rocking her to sleep that night. After that, Suzanne's drinking worsened, and I felt like a single parent most of the time. When she was home, she sat around with a wine glass in her hand for the most part. She'd cried over the loss of her friend, and I would try to comfort her. Sometimes she would let me. Sometimes I couldn't get near her. She would drink until she passed out. I spent many nights in the family room, holding Katya and rocking her until she cried herself to sleep and I could put her in bed. I never realized a heart could break into so many pieces, but mine had, and I had no idea how to put it back together. I tried to remember when Suzanne's drinking had become so bad. How had I missed the signs? Then I realized the signs were there from the beginning. I just had been too I had just been refused to acknowledge them. How could I have been so blind? One day, Sylvia confessed to me that she had become a little concerned about Suzanne before the wedding when Suzanne and Lila stopped by the hotel one evening to check her work schedule. She could tell they had been drinking, but she thought I knew, so she never said anything, feeling that it wasn't her business. She said she was sorry, and I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I stopped allowing Suzanne to drive, which angered her at first, but she soon realized it was for the best. On the road, she was not just a danger to herself. With the help of Lance and Teresa, and hours of talking to Suzanne, we finally convinced her to enter a program to get the help she needed. I promised her that I would always be there for her and reiterated that she needed to do this not only for herself, but for her family. After all, she was a mother now. Her progress was slow but steady, and when she finally made it to 30 days of sobriety, we all went out to celebrate. I began to feel close to my wife again, and that night we made love for the first time in months. With each day that passed, I watched her change. She began to concentrate on growing her fashion career, and she doted on Katya. We began to dream together again and plan for Katya's future. 6 months later, a visit from two old high school friends, both of them male, changed everything. The drinking started again, along with the late nights. Sometimes when she came home, there was a scent permeating around her that I remembered from high school. There were a few kids who smoked marijuana in their cars before coming to class. It was a strong smell, one that stayed in your memory once you got a whiff of it. That smell was now surrounding my wife regularly. One day I finally confronted her about it, stunned when she turned on me and screamed that it was none of my business. "You don't own me," she yelled. I couldn't believe we had come to this. Many times I planned things to do with Katya and tried to include Suzanne, but my pleas went unheard. Every once in a while, we would come home to find that she had not moved all day. She would be sitting in the same spot in a t-shirt and pajama bottoms, her surroundings littered with empty beer cans and a wine bottle or two. The room always stunk of alcohol, and I'd have to open windows and spray the area down to get rid of the smell. Like Lila, Suzanne was wasting away before my very eyes, and I had no clue how to help her. One night, as I sat by the lake, cooling off from a sparring session, I whispered, "Why did you not tell me, Papa?" I thought she was the one. I had not been prepared to hear my father's soft reply. "You ask me? But why? Why did you not ask God, son?" With that answer came a bitter truth. My pride and neglect to call upon God had caused me to make one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I prayed on a regular basis. I always had, but not about marrying Suzanne. Upon that realization, I immediately apologized to God and asked for forgiveness. Then I thought about Katya. Having her in my life was not a mistake. She was the one bright spot in all of this. But what now, God? I wondered, my thoughts drawn to the present as Suzanne opened the door. Light from the nightlight in the hallway spilled into the room. As usual, she said nothing until she undressed and fell into bed. Rolling over to me, she ran her fingers through my hair clumsily. "Need a haircut, babe?" Her words were more slurred than usual, her breath and body smelling like a distillery. When her hand wandered over my chest, I lightly pushed it away. Less than a moment later, she was asleep. Feeling numb, I got up and went down to the family room. Grabbing the remote, I slowly flipped through the channels. Of the 80 channels, over half were airing infomercials. The rest had nothing on that interested me. Turning the television off, I put my feet up, lay back against the pillow, and closed my eyes. I was tired and empty, and I didn't want to do this anymore. I had promised to stand by Suzanne, but that was back when the love was still there. Sadly, it faded long ago, and there was nothing I could do about it. Part of me would always care about her, but it could never be like it was before. Chapter 6. Fragile Hearts. The following day I had meetings all morning, so I did not see Suzanne. I did leave a note on the counter, letting her know that Katya was with me. When Katya came to live with us, I made the decision to teach her at home. Suzanne thought it was a great idea, but she never offered to help. She wouldn't even try, always using the excuse that she was too busy, which was not the case. It saddened me every time this happened. Suzanne was the only mother Katya had now. We were the ones she looked to for nurturing, and she needed all the attention we could give her. Katya was 10 now, and when I had meetings, I usually took her with me. She would sit in my office and do her work while I met with the management in the boardroom. I met with Tim and Andrew, my accountants, in my office, not wanting to be away from her for long. Despite the tragic things that Katya had experienced, she was smart and very gifted. In addition to her school studies, she learned to play the piano so well, the student had become the teacher, and I now learned from her. We also had a period when I gave her Jeet Kune Do instruction. I couldn't believe it when she came to me at 8 years old and said, "Angelo, I want to learn karate from you." I had smiled and explained exactly what it was that I studied, thinking she would be put off because of all the training it encompassed, but she was even more eager to start. Katya watched a concert on television one evening and came to me the next day wanting to learn the cello. I asked her if she was sure, and she was adamant, so I bought a student cello, hired a teacher, and she started lessons. She picked it up so quickly, the teacher was just as stunned as I was. She immediately moved on to the violin and the guitar, and I turned one of the extra bedrooms into a music room for her. Her instruments stood in every corner, and framed posters of great musicians hung on the walls. A few months before Katya turned 9, she informed me that she wanted to start studying ballet, so I enrolled her in a class one afternoon a week. She advanced quickly and was now in point, an extraordinary feat. I had floor-to-ceiling mirrors and a bar installed in the game room that had been vacant since Papa bought the house. The room already had a hardwood floor, and she now used it to practice 3 times a week. I was completely amazed by her. She was a prodigy. Whatever she wanted to do, she did, and she did it brilliantly. There wasn't an idle bone in her body. When I talked with Sylvia about Katya's gift of perfecting new talents, she helped me to understand that children dealt with experiences in different ways emotionally. Katya was truly a gifted child, and maybe her way of coping with the loss of her mother and the uprooting of her life was to learn new things she could focus on. Her growing abilities helped to keep her centered, and as far as stability, I was now the only permanent fixture in her life. I watched her from where I sat at my desk with Tim and Andrew. She was working in her spelling book. Sensing my gaze, she looked up and gave me one of those adorable smiles that completely melted my heart. Then she lifted her hands and signed, "I love you, Angelo." Ignoring the amused grins of the 2 men, I signed back, "I love you too, Tesora." I didn't know what the future held for Suzanne and me, but I did understand that Katya, my little treasure, needed me. If I did nothing else in this life, I would take care of her. We wrapped up the meeting around 2. I hadn't stopped for lunch, and I was starving. Katya had eaten the snacks we'd packed for her, and I worried about her being hungry as well. Sylvia had come up earlier and tried to coax her into going down to having something in the restaurant, but she'd wanted to wait until we could eat together. Sylvia knew Katya well enough by now not to push, so she just brought up a side of mozzarella sticks to hold her over for a while. Katya had thanked her, then brought the dish over to share with me. After seeing the men out, I packed up my laptop and helped Katya pack up her things. "What do you say we call Suzanne and see if she wants to go out and eat with us?" "Okay. Can I call her?" "Sure." I gave her my cell phone and watched with a smile as she called. No matter how much Suzanne neglected her, Katya was always thinking of her, and she kept trying, determined to win her affections again. The problem was, Katya shouldn't have to try. "No answer at home," she said. Should I try our cell? Yes. If she's out already, maybe we can meet her. While Katya called, I looked over my appointment book and checked my schedule for the next week. Having covered everything that I wanted to today, I didn't have another management meeting until the following week. I considered asking Suzanne if we could do something fun with Katya, but I knew she would have an excuse. Still, there would be no harm in asking her. I sighed inwardly, suddenly exhausted. Who is this? Katya asked, causing me to look up. It hurt to see the confused look on her face because I understood without even having to ask. When she hung up, there were tears in her eyes. She handed me the phone. A man answered And what? I said, pressing a hand to her cheek. It's all right, sweetheart. You can tell me. Tears rolled down her face. Angelo. She was laughing and told him to come back to bed. Her face crumbled, and I held her as she buried it against my shoulder. In that moment, I hated Suzanne. I hated her for hurting Katya and for abandoning us both. I would have to forgive her, I knew, and not hold on to the bitterness. But at that moment, it was hard to think about anything except what Katya must be feeling. Her little heart was breaking, and my heart ached for her. It's all right, Katharina. Everything is going to be all right. I kissed her brow. Let's go home. We'll stop and get something on the way.